Outsourcing can make a business feel lighter at the beginning, but the moment the business grows, that same model often starts getting heavier again. Not because the work comes back onto payroll, it comes back as coordination, correction, delays, quality control, and constant supervision. That is what makes this easy to miss. Today, outsourcing can look highly organized. You can find talent through platforms like Upwork, Fiverr, or Toptal. You can manage contractors through Deel or remote. You can run communication and workflow through tools like Asana, ClickUp, or Slack. So from the outside, the whole operation can look lean, flexible, and scalable. Early on, it often does work. When volume is still low, mistakes are easier to catch, handoffs are easier to patch, and the founder is still close enough to everything to keep the system looking smooth. But low volume hides weakness. It hides missing context, inconsistent judgment, slow correction, and the amount of manual rescue still happening underneath. The tools can help organize outsourced work. They can make it easier to assign, track, and manage, but they cannot remove the deeper burden that shows up when more clients, more orders, more revisions, and more exceptions start moving through the business. This video is about that breakpoint, when outsourcing stops feeling like leverage and starts becoming fragility. And that matters, because the goal is not to treat all outsourcing as a mistake. Some kinds of outsourced work really can help a business stay lighter early on. The real issue is knowing where that help is real and where it starts turning into hidden dependence as the business grows. What makes this dangerous is that outsourcing can look healthy for a while. A founder outsources a few functions. The work gets done. The business stays lean. Nothing appears broken yet. That is usually the point where the model starts earning trust. And to be fair, some kinds of outsourcing really do fit that stage well. If the task is narrow, repeatable, and easy to check, such as editing, admin support, basic design production, simple fulfillment steps, or routine research, outsourcing can take real weight off the business. That early fit matters. Later in this video, I will show where the line usually starts moving, when the work stops being simple to verify and starts depending on judgment, speed, customer sensitivity, or too many connected handoffs. Until then, the model can feel stronger than it really is, because low volume is still hiding the cost of coordination. Small mistakes are still containable. Delays can still be absorbed. One messy handoff does not yet damage the whole operation. That is why early outsourcing can look efficient before growth starts testing it properly. You usually do not notice the problem when outsourcing starts. You notice it when the business gets busier and simple things stop staying simple. A task that used to take one message now takes 5. A revision that used to be minor now delays the next step. A client request needs context that never made it into the handoff. A deadline slips, and suddenly the founder is back in the middle, translating, checking, approving, and fixing. That is normally the first practical sign. The business is still outsourcing the work, but the founder is starting to absorb more of the coordination around the work. This is where the tools can create false reassurance. The board is updated, the messages are there, the contractor is assigned, the payment system is working, so from the outside it still looks organized. But the real question is no longer whether the work is visible, it is whether the work is moving cleanly without constant intervention. And that is where pressure starts showing up. If the founder has to keep clarifying instructions, chasing updates, correcting output, or stepping in to protect quality, then the business is not becoming lighter. It is just shifting more of the weight into management. That is the practical warning sign this video is really about. When outsourced work still gets done, but only because someone is constantly holding the system together behind the scenes. That is usually the stage right before growth starts exposing bigger weaknesses. When growth hits, the first thing that usually breaks is not the task itself, it is the space between tasks. The handoff is less clear, the context is thinner, the response takes longer, the correction arrives later than it should. Small misses start stacking on top of each other. That is when outsourcing stops feeling like extra capacity and starts feeling like operational drag. A deliverable comes back usable but not usable enough, so it needs revision. That revision delays the next step. The next step now goes out with less time, less clarity, and more pressure. Then another person touches it without the full context, and the quality starts drifting even when everyone is technically doing their job. This is where many founders make the wrong read. They think the issue is effort or talent or communication style, but a lot of the time, the deeper issue is that the business is now running on too many dependent handoffs for the current structure to hold cleanly. And the tools do not solve that by themselves. A task board can show where the work is, Slack can show who replied, Asana or ClickUp can show what is assigned, Deel or Remote can make the contractor layer cleaner, but none of that guarantees that the work moves with enough context, consistency, urgency, and ownership once the system gets busier. So the founder starts doing more invisible work. Explaining again, checking before sending, catching mistakes earlier, following up more often, protecting the customer from seeing the mess underneath. That is the real scaling break. The business still looks outsourced on paper, but in practice, more and more of the reliability is coming from manual supervision. And once that happens, growth starts producing a strange result. More activity, but less simplicity. More output, but more friction. More outsourced capacity, but more founder dependence. That is when the model starts getting heavier, exactly where it was supposed to get lighter. This is the point where outsourcing stops being a capacity decision and starts becoming a business quality problem. Because once the founder is spending more time checking, correcting, chasing, and protecting the outcome, the cost is no longer just what is being paid to outside help. The cost is now in the drag around the work. A job that looked cheap takes longer to approve. A workflow that looked lean needs more follow-up. A deliverable that looked finished creates more revision. A customer issue that should have stayed small turns into recovery work. And that cost spreads quietly. It shows up in slower delivery. It shows up in weaker consistency. It shows up in client confidence slipping. It shows up in the founder losing attention that should have gone into growth, sales, product, or strategy. That is why this gets dangerous. The model can still look efficient on the surface because the business is still using outsourced capacity, still moving work, still avoiding a larger in-house team, and still running through modern systems that make the operation appear organized. But underneath, the business is becoming harder to trust. And once that happens, growth stops feeling like leverage. It starts feeling like exposure. Because every new client, every new order, every new request, and every new revision now puts more pressure on a structure that already needs manual rescue to stay reliable. That is the real cost of outsourcing when it gets too handoff dependent, not just spending money on outside help, but building a business that becomes more fragile every time it gets busier. The bigger lesson here is not that outsourcing is broken. It is that a business should not judge leverage too early, because a model can look efficient when volume is low, when tools are keeping everything visible, and when the founder still has enough attention to quietly hold the weak parts together. That does not mean the system is truly light. It may only mean the strain has not become visible yet. And that is the trap. A business can outsource work. It can manage contractors well. It can run through Slack, ClickUp, Asana, Deel, or Remote. It can still look clean from the outside. But if growth keeps increasing the need for clarification, correction, follow-up, quality control, and customer recovery, then the business is not really becoming more scalable. It is becoming more dependent on hidden supervision. And that is what makes this dangerous, because the model can look modern, flexible, and efficient right up until the moment the business gets busy enough to reveal what was actually holding it together the whole time. So the real question is not whether outsourced work is getting done. The real question is whether the business becomes simpler or more fragile as volume rises. That is the difference between borrowed capacity and real scale. And in a lot of businesses, that difference only becomes obvious once growth is already exposing it. A useful rule is this: outsource narrow work first, not coordination heavy work. Keep the most quality sensitive and customer sensitive parts of the business closer to the core for longer. Then, as volume rises, do not replace the whole model at once. Bring tighter oversight in-house first. Then bring the most failure-sensitive functions closer to the business as the pressure becomes harder to hide.